I'd worked as a forest ranger at Olympic National Park for 10 years now, and not once in all that time had I told anyone about the things I'd seen. Who would believe me anyway? My coworkers would think I needed a psych evaluation. My family would worry. So I kept my mouth shut and did my job and tried to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real, but I knew better. What happened 3 months ago made sure of that. It started as a normal search and rescue operation. A 10-year-old boy named Samuel Parker had gone missing during a family hiking trip near Hurricane Ridge. His parents lost sight of him when he ran ahead on the trail, and after searching for hours, they called park services in a panic. These things happen more often than most visitors realized. Kids wandering off the marked paths, getting turned around in the woods. Usually we found them hiding in a hollow log or sitting by a stream, scared but unharmed. That morning I got paired with James Miller. He'd only been with us for about 6 weeks, was eager, followed the rules exactly, and looked at me like I had all the answers. We took the northeastern part of the search area. The forest was filled with Douglas firs and western hemlocks. The trees overhead blocked most of the light, leaving the forest floor full of shadows with spots of sunlight breaking through. You ever been part of a missing child search before? I asked Miller as we made our way through a particularly dense stretch. No, sir, just the training scenarios. Well, stick close. Kids don't always follow logical patterns when they're lost. They zigzag, double back, hide if they're scared. Miller nodded, his face tight with concentration. What are we looking for besides the boy himself? Footprints, broken branches, candy wrappers, anything that doesn't belong. We hiked for nearly 2 hours, calling Samuel's name and scanning the ground for signs of passage. Nothing seemed out of place until Miller pointed upward through a gap in the trees. "Wilson, what's that?" At first, I didn't see what he was pointing at. Then a slight breeze moved the branches, and I saw it. A black balloon, perfectly round and shiny, tied to the top branch of a young pine about 50 yards ahead. It floated there, really still once the breeze died down. "That's not normal," I said, already walking toward it. The balloon made no sense. We were miles from any road or campsite, deep in a section of the park visitors rarely entered. Even if some hiker had released it accidentally, the chances of it catching on that specific tree, in this specific area of dense forest, were super unlikely. And yet there it was. Maybe the kid had it? Birthday party or something? Miller suggested, but his voice betrayed his doubt. "Let's check it out." We approached cautiously. The balloon didn't move, even as another light breeze moved the surrounding trees. It stayed still, as if it were watching us. Below it, I noticed crushed plants, signs that someone had moved through here recently. "Tracks," I said, kneeling down. "Adult-sized, barefoot." Miller looked confused. "Barefoot? Out here?" I nodded, standing up again. The tracks led away from the balloon deeper into the woods. They weren't Samuel's, too large, but they were fresh, and they weren't there by coincidence. "Let's follow them, stay alert." The tracks led us through a twisted path for about a 1/4 mile. The forest got quieter the farther we went, with the bird calls and small animal noises disappearing until all I could hear was our breathing and the leaves crunching under our boots. Then Miller grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. A low moan went through the trees, sounding somewhere between pain and despair. Human, definitely, but barely recognizable as such. We started moving faster, following both the sound and the tracks until we came into a small clearing. I'd seen a lot in my 10 years as a ranger. Hikers with broken bones, victims of animal attacks, even a body once. Nothing prepared me for what was in that clearing. A man lay curled on his side in the middle of the bare ground. He was completely naked, his skin covered in so much blood it looked painted on. He shook and twitched, his limbs jerking like he was trying to crawl away from himself. Against his chest was a small human arm, cut off at the shoulder. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered, his face going pale. My training kicked in, even as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Wilson. We need immediate medical assistance and law enforcement at my GPS coordinates. We have found an injured adult male and evidence of violence against a minor. Possible homicide. Over." The dispatcher responded, but I barely heard her. I approached the man slowly while motioning for Miller to stay back. "Sir, I'm a park ranger. We're getting you help. Can you tell me your name?" The man's eyes rolled toward me, bloodshot and unfocused. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no words came out, just a wet, clicking sound. I moved closer, trying to find where the blood was coming from. He was covered in it, but I couldn't see any wounds on him. The blood wasn't his. It was the boy's. The severed arm was small, too small. The skin was soft, like a child's. I noticed a red and blue woven bracelet around the wrist. The missing child report had said Samuel wore a friendship bracelet his sister made him. I forced myself to look more closely at the man. No ID, nothing to show who he was or where he came from. His eyes suddenly locked with mine and his mouth twisted into what wasn't really a smile. "The stairs," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "The stairs." "What stairs? Where's the boy? Where's Samuel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "The stairs," he repeated over and over. Nothing else. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. Emily Howard and Thomas Reed, both experienced with backcountry emergencies. They approached professionally, but I saw the shock register on their faces when they took in the scene. "The arm?" Emily asked quietly as she prepared a backboard. "Belongs to a missing child we're searching for," I confirmed. 10-year-old boy. No sign of the rest of him. Emily nodded grimly and knelt beside the man, who had stopped convulsing but continued his mumbled mantra about stairs. She checked his vitals while Thomas prepared a sedative. "Sir, I'm going to check your pupils," she said, leaning over him with a penlight. It happened so fast. The man's hand shot out, grabbing Emily's wrist. He yanked her down and bit into the fleshy part of her hand between thumb and forefinger. Emily screamed, more in surprise than pain. Thomas and I pulled her back while Miller held the man's shoulders down. Blood ran from Emily's hand, her blood now mixing with the dried layers already coating the man. "He took the boy to the stairs," the man said clearly, his voice suddenly different, deeper, almost conversational. Then Thomas administered the sedative, and the man's eyes rolled back. The next few hours passed in a blur of procedures. The man was transported to Western State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. The severed arm was confirmed through fingerprints to belong to Samuel Parker. Search teams combed the entire area but found no trace of the rest of Samuel's body. The unidentified man had no fingerprints on record, no missing persons report matching his description, no clue to who he was or where he came from. The investigation stalled after a week. Without the rest of the body, without any explanation for the man's presence in the woods, without any lead to follow, the case hit a wall. The bloodied man remained nonverbal at the psychiatric facility. Tests showing no drugs in his system, but severe psychological trauma of unknown origin. That was 3 months ago. I tried to go back to normal duties, patrolling trails, helping lost hikers, checking permits, but I couldn't shake what I'd seen. At night, I dreamed of that black balloon floating among the trees, perfectly still even as everything around it moved in the wind. I heard the man's voice change as he spoke his final coherent sentence before being sedated. He took the boy to the stairs. A week passed, and the forest kept its secrets. I tried to focus on my regular duties, but my mind kept going back to the clearing, to the blood-covered man, to Samuel Parker's severed arm. I wasn't sleeping through the night anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that weird smile, heard that scratchy voice talking about stairs. Miller seemed shaken too, but he turned it into determination. "I want to find that boy," he told me as we got ready for morning patrol. Even if it's just the rest of him. His family deserves that. Our assignment took us back to the northeastern quadrant, not far from where we'd found the bloody man. The weather had turned cool and damp, with fog hanging between the huge Douglas firs. The forest felt different somehow, like it was watching us. "Let's split up to cover more ground," I suggested as we reached a fork in the trail. "You take the eastern path along the ridge. I'll check the stream bed. Radio check every 15 minutes. Miller nodded and fixed his hat. "Sounds good. 15 minutes on the dot." I watched him walk away until the mist and trees covered him up. The first check-in came right on time. Miller said nothing unusual happened on his route. I told him the same and kept looking. 15 minutes later, I used my radio again. "Miller, check in. Over." No response. "Miller, do you copy?" "Over." Silence. I waited another minute, then tried again. Nothing but static. I felt sick to my stomach. Maybe his radio battery died. Maybe he was in a bad reception area. Maybe he just got sidetracked and forgot. Or maybe not. I went toward where he last said he was, walking fast but watching my step on the trail. The forest was quiet now. No birds, no leaves moving, just the sound of my boots on the ground. I yelled his name every few yards, but the thick fog seemed to swallow my voice. 20 minutes later, I saw something on the trail. Miller's radio was lying in the dirt. His ranger hat was next to it. I picked up the radio. It was still on with a full battery. The hat looked like it had been placed there on purpose, not dropped during a fight. "Miller!" I shouted, spinning in a circle. "Miller!" My voice echoed through the trees and faded. No answer came back. I looked around for tracks, broken branches, anything showing where he might have gone. The trail kept going ahead, but Miller's boot prints just stopped. The dirt didn't show any signs of struggle, no drag marks, nothing suggesting he'd left the trail. He had just vanished. I radioed dispatch, sounding urgent. Within an hour, every available ranger showed up. By nightfall, park police had set up a command center. Search dogs arrived. Helicopters with heat cameras checked the forest. We searched every inch of that part of the park. Ravines, caves, bushes. Nothing. 5 days we searched. 5 days of growing desperation. I barely slept, getting an hour or two in a tent at the command center before going back out. I knew what happens to people lost in the wilderness. Every hour made it less likely we'd find Miller alive. On the 5th day, they cut back the search. Missing persons flyers went up at trailheads. Miller's photo showed up on local news. His family came, looking empty and shocked. I couldn't look them in the face. What could I say? That their son had disappeared without a trace in an area dozens of trained professionals had thoroughly searched. That the last person to see him was me? I kept thinking about the bloody man, about Samuel Parker, about that weird phrase, "He took the boy to the stairs." And now James Miller was gone too. 3 days after Miller was officially declared missing, I went back to patrol duty. My supervisor thought sticking to routine would help. I took a route near Hurricane Ridge, making myself focus on simple tasks, checking trail conditions, picking up trash, nodding to the few hikers who passed. Late afternoon, I crossed a small meadow between two forested slopes. The grass grew tall, moving gently in the breeze. I saw a strange pattern about 100 yards ahead, something too regular to be natural. Getting closer, I realized what I was seeing, and I felt ice cold. 13 deer lay in the meadow, arranged in a perfect circle, their heads pointing inward like wheel spokes. They were all positioned exactly the same way, legs tucked under their bodies as if they'd all decided to rest at the exact same moment. Too perfect. Too planned. I approached slowly, looking for signs of predators. Maybe wolves had somehow killed an entire herd. But there was no blood, no signs of attack. The deer looked completely fine, their coats shiny. Then I noticed their eyes. All 13 deer stared upward, eyes wide open. They weren't rotting yet. They looked recently dead, maybe hours old at most. As I walked around the circle, I felt chills up my spine. Their eyes moved. At first, I thought it was just the light. But as I walked around them, each dead deer's eyes followed me like paintings in a haunted house. I felt sweat on my forehead despite the cool air. This wasn't possible. Dead eyes don't follow you. Dead animals don't arrange themselves in perfect circles. I made myself take pictures showing the scene from different angles. My hands shook so badly I had to steady the camera against my chest. Through the camera, the scene looked almost normal. Just dead wildlife. But I knew what I'd seen. I radioed it in, keeping my voice professional despite being scared. Dispatch, Ranger Wilson. I've got multiple deer deaths at my location. Requesting wildlife management help. My supervisor, David Roberts, arrived with the wildlife experts an hour later. They examined the circle of deer, taking samples and measurements. No one mentioned the weird arrangement. I stood back, watching their faces. You notice anything strange about them? I finally asked David. He looked up from his clipboard. Like what? They're in a perfect circle. I gestured at the formation. And their eyes. Watch them when you move around the circle. David looked unhappy but walked slowly around the perimeter. I watched his face, waiting for the moment of recognition. The shock when he realized the dead eyes were following him. But his expression stayed neutral. Not sure what I'm supposed to be seeing, Wilson, he said. I walked over to one of the deer and crouched beside it. Its eye was looking at me, still bright, not cloudy like it was dead. You don't see this? They're tracking movement. All of them. David put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, you've been through a lot lately. First the Parker boy, then Miller. Maybe you should take some time. I know what I'm seeing, I said more sharply than I intended. This isn't natural. Something is wrong here. The wildlife experts found no obvious cause of death. No wounds, no signs of poison, no evidence of disease. They loaded the deer into their trucks for further testing at the lab. I watched them leave, feeling like important evidence was disappearing right in front of me. The test results came back 3 days later, inconclusive. All 13 deer were healthy adult females who had simply stopped living, all at the same time, all in the same place, all in the same position. Science had no explanation. That night, I dreamed of the meadow. The circle of deer was still there, still perfect, still watching. But now James Miller stood in the center. He looked the same as when I'd last seen him, except for his eyes. They matched the deer's eyes, wide open, unblinking, following me as I got closer. Don't touch the stairs, he whispered. I tried to ask him what he meant, where he was, what had happened. But no sound came out of my mouth. The deer began to rise, still in weird positions, legs still folded under them. They floated up like balloons, eyes never leaving mine. Miller floated too, his feet leaving the ground. Don't touch the stairs, he repeated, voice fading as he drifted higher. He's playing games with us. Don't touch the stairs. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. The digital clock beside my bed showed 3:17 a.m. The bloodied man in the forest. The stairs. Miller in my dream. Don't touch the stairs. I sat in the dark, listening to my ragged breathing. Was I losing my mind? Trauma-induced hallucinations? Or was something impossible happening in the woods I'd worked in for 10 years? I didn't know which answer scared me more. 1 month had passed since Miller vanished. The forest had taken him just like it had taken Samuel Parker, leaving nothing but questions that kept me awake at night. I'd started volunteering for night patrols, partly because I couldn't sleep anyway, but mostly because I hoped being alone might help me make sense of what was happening. The darkness didn't scare me. After 10 years in these woods, I knew the normal sounds of the night forest, the rustle of small animals, the soft hooting of owls, the constant noise of insects. What scared me was when those sounds stopped. That night, I was checking the remote Enchanted Valley area. My flashlight lit up the darkness as I followed the trail. The valley looked amazing during the day, a green paradise with an old chalet and waterfalls flowing down steep rock walls. But at night, with only stars and my flashlight providing light, it felt completely different. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I noticed it, the silence. One moment crickets chirped and leaves rustled in the light breeze. The next, nothing. Complete stillness. I stopped walking and turned off my flashlight, letting my eyes get used to the darkness. The silence was absolute. No insects, no rustling leaves, even with the breeze I could still feel on my face. No distant calls of night birds, just the sound of my own breathing, too loud in my ears. Then the temperature dropped suddenly. The mild summer night suddenly felt like deep winter. My breath made fog in front of my face. The cold went right through my uniform jacket. I turned my flashlight back on, moving the beam across the trail ahead. Nothing looked wrong, but the weird silence and cold made the hair on my neck stand up. I took a few careful steps forward, looking at the trees on both sides of the trail. That's when I saw him. A tall figure standing still between distant trees. He was too far away to see clearly, just a shape darker than the surrounding darkness. But he was watching me. I just knew it. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded wrong in the silence, like it didn't carry properly. "This is Park Ranger Wilson. Identify yourself." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there watching. I should have radioed for backup, should have kept my distance, but after a month of unanswered questions, of searching for Miller, of trying to make sense of the bloodied man and his cryptic words about stairs, I needed answers more than I needed safety. I moved toward the figure, my flashlight beam bouncing with each step. As I got closer, details emerged that made me hesitate. The man was unusually tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. His skin was pale, not just white, but see-through looking, with veins visible underneath. But his eyes scared me. They were completely white. No pupils, no irises, just blank white eyes that somehow still seemed to be looking at me. I stopped about 15 feet away from him, my hand moving to the pepper spray on my belt. Not that I thought it would help against whatever this was. "Good evening, Ranger Wilson," the man said. His voice had an accent I couldn't place, not quite British, not quite anything I recognized. It sounded old somehow, like language from another time. "How do you know my name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know all the players." He smiled, and I saw his teeth. Too many of them, and all unnaturally sharp. "My name is Michael Sullivan. I've been looking forward to meeting you properly." Sullivan. The name the bloodied man had mentioned, the name that had made my supervisor go pale. "What are you doing in the park after hours?" I asked, falling back on protocol because I had nothing else to hold on to. "The trails are closed after sunset." Sullivan laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. "Are you enjoying our game, Ranger Wilson?" "What game? What are you talking about?" "The search, the discovery, the fear." He tilted his head at an angle that looked wrong, too far to one side. "Players don't need to understand the rules. They just need to play." My mouth felt dry. "Where's James Miller? Where's Samuel Parker?" Sullivan's smile got bigger. "Your friend James plays well. The boy too. Present tense, plays, not played. They were alive. Where are they?" I took a step forward, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "What did you do to them?" "I opened doors. They walked through." Sullivan's white eyes never blinked, as will you in time. What does that mean? What doors? But Sullivan was already backing away, looking like he was gliding backwards. His body got blurrier with each second as he disappeared into the dark between the trees. I jumped forward, pointing my flashlight at him as he left. "Wait, tell me where they are." I pushed through the bushes, with branches hitting my face and arms. My flashlight showed nothing but empty forest ahead. Sullivan was gone completely. No footprints, no broken twigs, nothing to show he was ever there. I looked around for almost an hour, walking in wider and wider circles. Nothing. It was like Sullivan just disappeared the moment I couldn't see him anymore. The regular forest sounds slowly came back. A cricket started chirping. Then more joined in, and I could hear small animals moving in the bushes. The temperature went back to normal summer warm. Everything seemed normal again, but nothing would ever be normal again. The next morning, I told my supervisor, David Roberts, what happened. We sat in his small office at park headquarters. I stuck to the facts, telling him what Sullivan looked like, how strangely he talked, and what he knew about Miller and Parker. As I talked, David's face went pale. When I said Sullivan's name, he looked like he might throw up. "You're sure he called himself Michael Sullivan?" David asked, his voice tight. "Yes. He knew my name without me telling him. He talked about Miller and Parker like they're still alive." David stood abruptly, turning to look out the window. "I think you've been working too hard, Wilson. The stress of losing Miller, the Parker case, it's getting to you." "This wasn't stress or imagination," I said firmly. "I know what I saw. What you're describing isn't possible." David still wouldn't look at me. "I want you to take a few days off. Clear your head." "David, I'm not—" "That's an order, Wilson." He finally turned back to me, his expression closed off. "Take 3 days. Get some rest." I knew arguing would get me nowhere. I nodded quickly and left his office, feeling really frustrated. David knew something. His reaction to Sullivan's name had been too strong, too immediate for him to know nothing. I didn't take the 3 days off. I showed up for my shift the next morning as if the conversation had never happened. David looked unhappy when he saw me, but didn't send me home. We both pretended everything was normal. 3 days later, I was filing reports in the Rangers station when I heard voices from the break room. I knew them as Jack Thompson and Mark Reeves, both senior Rangers who'd been with the Park Service longer than I had. "Third one this year," Jack was saying, his voice low but tense. "First Parker, then Miller, now Sullivan's back. It's happening again." "Keep your voice down," Mark hissed. "You know we're not supposed to talk about it." Someone should warn the newer Rangers. Wilson's already encountered him. And say what? Watch out for the supernatural entity that stalks the park? They'd think we're crazy. Better crazy than dead, or whatever happened to Miller. I stepped into the doorway. Both men fell silent immediately, looking at me with expressions that mixed guilt and alarm. "What do you know about Sullivan?" I asked directly. Jack and Mark exchanged glances. Mark shook his head slightly. "Nothing," Jack said finally. "Just rumors." "Bullshit. You just said he's back. That means he's been here before. What is he? What does he want?" "Drop it, Wilson," Mark said, standing up. "For your own good." They both walked past me, ending the conversation. I stood there in the empty break room, more confused and frustrated than ever. Over the next few days, I tried to get information from other senior Rangers. No one would talk. Some pretended not to know what I was talking about. Others gave me the same advice. Drop it. Forget what I saw. Focus on my job. But I couldn't forget. Not the unnatural silence of the forest. Not Sullivan's white eyes and too sharp teeth. Not his words about Miller and Parker still playing his game. Whatever was happening in Olympic National Park went beyond missing hikers or strange animal behavior. The senior staff knew about it. They had protocols for it. And they were terrified of Michael Sullivan. I was going to find out why with or without their help. Miller and Parker were still out there somewhere, and now I had a name for what had taken them. Michael Sullivan, the pale man with white eyes who spoke of games and players and doors. I just needed to figure out the rules of his game before I became another missing person in these very old woods. Several weeks went by after my encounter with Michael Sullivan. The forest went back to normal, but I didn't. I jumped at every shadow. Every unexpected noise startled me. I kept looking for that super tall guy with white eyes in the trees, but he never showed up again. I'd tried talking to other rangers about Sullivan, but most just gave me blank looks or changed the subject. The few who recognized the name, like Jack and Mark, refused to talk about it. That told me everything I needed to know. Morning fog was still hanging low as I hiked through the old trees near the Elwha River. This spot wasn't on any tourist maps. It was too far out and rough for regular hikers, perfect for someone wanting to hide something. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I came to a small clearing I'd never seen before. What I found there stopped me in my tracks. 4 people sat around a wooden picnic table in the center of the clearing. At first glance, they looked like normal hikers taking a break. 3 men and a woman in hiking clothes, playing cards with beer cans next to them. But something felt off about the scene. They were too still, too quiet. None of them even looked up when I got closer. "Hello?" I called out, hand moving to my radio. No response. I moved closer, boots crunching on fallen leaves. Still no reaction from the group. When I was about 10 feet away, I understood why. They weren't people. They were mannequins? No, that wasn't quite right. These things were too detailed, too perfect. Their skin had pores, wrinkles, even faint veins visible beneath the surface. One man had stubble that looked real enough to hurt if I touched it. The woman had a small scar above her eyebrow. Their eyes were the worst part, glassy, but somehow aware, like stuffed animals. I walked around the table slowly. Each one held playing cards showing a game in progress. Their beer cans were positioned mid-drink, one tilted toward a mannequin's frozen lips. They wore high-end hiking gear, North Face jackets, Merrell boots, expensive watches. Everything about them looked real except for their complete stillness. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Close-ups of their faces, their hands, the cards they held, wide shots of the entire scene. I even recorded a short video, narrating what I was seeing in a voice that sounded calmer than I felt. 4 figures arranged around a picnic table. Unknown material, but extremely lifelike. No identifying marks or tags visible. Scene appears staged to look like hikers taking a break. I reached out, pausing before touching the nearest figure's shoulder. It felt like skin, warm and a little soft when I pressed it. I pulled my hand back quickly, wiping it on my pants. These weren't mannequins. I didn't know what they were, but they weren't store displays or art installations. No manufacturer could make something this realistic. And who would drag 4 life-sized figures miles into the backcountry just to arrange them around a table? I radioed headquarters, keeping my report simple and straightforward. "This is Ranger Wilson. I've found something unusual at my location. 4 lifelike figures arranged around a picnic table, requesting forensic assistance." The dispatcher asked if I'd found human remains. I wasn't sure how to answer. "Negative. Not remains. But I need someone to see this." I gave my coordinates and was told a forensic technician would meet me at the ranger station in 2 hours. I could guide them back to the site. I spent another 30 minutes documenting everything about the scene, measuring the table, noting the positions of the beer cans, even writing down the specific cards each figure held. The woman had a full house. The man across from her was bluffing with a pair of 2s. Before leaving, I placed small markers at the edge of the clearing so I could find it again easily. I took one last look at the frozen card players, then headed back toward the station. The forensic tech who met me was Peterson. He didn't say much as we drove back toward the site, just nodded occasionally as I described what I'd found. His lack of surprise bothered me. "Have you seen something like this before?" I asked as we parked at the trailhead. Peterson checked his equipment bag before answering. "I've worked in this park for 27 years. I've seen a lot of things." Not a real answer, but I was getting used to that. The hike back took longer with Peterson following. He moved carefully, taking his time, stopping occasionally to catch his breath. The whole time, I kept thinking about those figures at the table, wondering if they'd somehow moved or changed since I'd left them. When we finally reached the clearing, I stopped at the edge, confused. The picnic table was still there. The beer cans were still there, sitting exactly where I'd documented them. Playing cards were scattered across the table's surface, the same hands I'd noted earlier. But the figures were gone. "This isn't possible," I said, rushing to the table. "They were right here. 4 of them, sitting around the table." Peterson didn't seem surprised. He pulled on latex gloves and began examining the beer cans. "They were right here," I repeated, pulling out my phone. "Look, I have pictures." I opened my photo gallery and froze. The pictures were there. The clearing, the picnic table, the beer cans, the playing cards. But in every shot, the table was empty. No figures. No impossibly lifelike mannequins playing poker in the middle of nowhere. "This isn't right," I said, scrolling frantically through the images. "They were here. I touched one of them. It felt warm." Peterson was collecting the beer cans into evidence bags, labeling each one carefully. "You don't seem surprised," I said, watching him work. He glanced up briefly. "Like I said, I've been here a long time." "So you've seen this before? Things that appear and disappear? Things that don't show up in photographs?" Peterson sealed an evidence bag before answering. "We're just collecting physical evidence today, Ranger Wilson. That's my job." He worked methodically, gathering the playing cards, taking samples from the table surface, photographing the scene. I stood back, feeling increasingly frustrated. The evidence of what I'd seen was literally disappearing before my eyes, and the one person who might have answers was deliberately avoiding my questions. When we finished, Peterson had a collection of bagged items, beer cans, playing cards, wood samples from the table, soil from around it, physical evidence that something had been there, but nothing to prove what I'd actually seen. "What happens to all this?" I asked as we hiked back. "Standard analysis. I'll file a report." "And then what?" Peterson adjusted his pack. "Then it goes in the files with all the others." All the others. So there were more incidents like this, more things that couldn't be explained. "Does this have something to do with Michael Sullivan?" I asked. Peterson stopped walking so suddenly I almost ran into him. He turned, his expression serious for the first time. "Where did you hear that name?" "I met him, in the forest. Tall man, white eyes, too many teeth." Peterson's face paled. "You spoke with him?" "Yes, he knew my name. Talked about Miller and Parker like they're still alive." Peterson looked away, then continued walking without another word. We hiked the rest of the way in silence. When we reached the trailhead, he took his evidence bags and left without saying goodbye. I spent that night looking through my photos again and again, trying to understand how 4 lifelike figures could simply vanish, not just from the clearing, but from my documented evidence. I knew what I'd seen. I knew I hadn't imagined it. 3 days later, I was patrolling an area near Mount Olympus. The trail went through alpine meadows dotted with late summer wildflowers. The mountain itself stood tall in the distance, its glaciers shining in the afternoon sun. It was the kind of view that reminded me why I'd become a ranger in the first place. I was checking a backcountry campsite when I noticed a game trail leading into a stand of subalpine firs. Something about it caught my attention. The way the light came through the branches, or maybe some movement just at the edge of my vision. I followed the narrow path, pushing aside low-hanging branches. The trees grew thicker as I walked, blocking out more of the sunlight until I was moving through green-tinted shadows. The air felt cooler here, damper. Then the trees opened into another small clearing and I saw it. A staircase. Just standing there in the middle of the forest. No building attached, no structure around it. Just a weathered wooden staircase with fancy railings, looking like it belonged in an old mansion, not in the wilderness. I'd heard talk about the stairs, rumors among the rangers, quickly silenced when supervisors were nearby. Never approach the stairs, they said. Never touch them. Never climb them. Now I understood why Jack had pulled me away from that well with such urgency. Why the bloodied man had repeated, "the stairs," like a mantra. Why Miller in my dream had warned me not to touch them. The staircase stood about 15 feet high, leading up to nothing but empty air. The wood looked old but not rotted, weathered gray like driftwood, with detailed carvings along the railings. It didn't belong here. Nothing like this should exist in a national park thousands of miles from the nearest Victorian home. I took out my phone and started recording, narrating quietly. Wooden staircase and clearing near Mount Olympus. No attached structure. Appears to be very old but in good condition. Ornate design inconsistent with park structures. I circled it slowly, keeping my distance. Unlike the mannequins, the stairs cast a shadow on the forest floor, a real physical object, not an illusion or hallucination. I wanted to leave. I should have called for backup or gotten far away from this impossible structure, but something about it kept me there. I felt like I needed to climb those stairs and see what was at the top. I moved closer, one slow step at a time. The air around the staircase felt different, heavier, filled with something I couldn't explain. My radio made static noises as I got closer, making me jump. I stood at the bottom step, looking up. 13 steps to nowhere. The wood grain had weird patterns that almost looked like faces if I stared too long. Before I could change my mind, I put my foot on the first step. Right away, I felt pressure against my whole body, like I was trying to walk into a strong wind. I couldn't breathe properly. My vision got dark around the edges. I felt complete terror that went beyond normal fear. Images flashed through my mind. Miller's empty hat on the trail, the circle of deer with moving eyes, Sullivan's too wide smile with too sharp teeth. Underneath it all, a whispered warning. Not yet. Not your time. Step back. I stumbled backward, falling onto the forest floor. The pressure disappeared instantly. I could breathe again. The fear went away, but I was still shaking on the ground. I scrambled away from the stairs, not stopping until my back hit a tree trunk. I was gasping for air. The staircase just stood there in the clearing, looking normal. Just an ordinary structure in a place where it shouldn't be, but I knew better now. The stairs weren't just out of place, they were wrong, dangerous, a way to somewhere else, just as Sullivan had said. I didn't take any pictures this time. I didn't call it in. I just marked the location on my GPS and left, walking quickly back to the main trail. I needed to understand what was happening before I told anyone else what I'd found. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, searching for answers. I started with the park's history, digging through digital archives of local newspapers. If Sullivan had been here before, if the stairs had been appearing for years, there might be records. It took hours of searching, but eventually patterns emerged. In 1923, 3 hikers disappeared within a month. The newspaper articles mentioned strange structures reported in remote areas of the newly established park. In 1956, a family of 4 vanished while camping. A week before they disappeared, multiple hikers reported seeing a staircase standing alone on Hurricane Ridge. In 1978, 2 park rangers went missing during routine patrols. Visitors that summer described stairs in impossible places throughout the park. And in 1994, 5 separate individuals disappeared over the summer. Each case mentioned unusual structures in the witness statements, staircases leading to nowhere, ornate stairs in the middle of the forest. Victorian steps among the trees. Now it was happening again. Samuel Parker, James Miller, and Michael Sullivan was back, talking about games and players and doors. The stairs weren't just a strange oddity. They were a pattern, a cycle that repeated every few decades. And somehow Sullivan was connected to all of it. I printed the articles and spread them across my table, looking for any detail I might have missed. The descriptions of the stairs were the same across decades. Always fancy, always wooden, always leading nowhere. The disappearances followed a similar pattern. People vanishing without a trace, often after reporting strange sightings in the park. What did Sullivan want? Why the complicated game? And most importantly, were Miller and Parker still alive somewhere, as he had hinted? I didn't have answers yet, but I had something to work with now. Evidence that went back nearly 100 years. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The stairs were real. Sullivan was real. And whatever game he was playing had been going on for a very long time. The fog hung so thick over the Hoh rainforest that I could barely see 20 feet ahead. Jack Thompson and I had been assigned to patrol together that Tuesday morning, checking the less traveled paths for storm damage or lost hikers. The moss-draped trees stood tall in the mist, their massive trunks disappearing into the white haze above. "Weather report says this won't burn off until afternoon," Jack said, zipping his jacket higher against the damp chill. I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else. Since finding the staircase 3 days ago, I'd been distracted, constantly replaying the experience in my head. That awful feeling of dread, the pressure against my body, the whispered warning. I hadn't told anyone about it yet, not even Jack, who seemed more likely than others to believe me. We followed a narrow trail that branched off from the main tourist path. This section rarely had visitors, too muddy, too overgrown, and missing the nice views that attracted photographers. Perfect for whatever didn't want to be found. "You've been quiet," Jack said after we'd been walking for about an hour. "Still thinking about those mannequins you found?" "Among other things," I said, stepping over a fallen branch. "Have you ever come across anything like that out here? Things that shouldn't exist?" Jack's pace slowed slightly. "What kind of things?" Before I could answer, a sound cut through the fog, high-pitched and unmistakable. "Help me, please, somebody help!" A child's voice. Jack and I froze, looking at each other to confirm we'd both heard it. The voice came again, more desperate this time. "I'm down here, please help me out." We left right away, making our way through the thick bushes toward the sound. The voice kept calling, leading us off the trail and deeper into the forest. Ferns hit against our legs as we walked between huge tree trunks. "Hello?" I called out. "Park rangers? Keep talking so we can find you." "I'm here. I'm down here." The child's voice sounded young, maybe 8 or 9 years old. We pushed through some thick bushes and found a small clearing. In the middle was an old stone well with a wall about 3 feet high. Some rotting wooden boards partly covered the opening, with gaps big enough to see through but too small for a child to climb out. The voice was definitely coming from inside. "Help me, please! I can't get out!" I approached the well, my boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. Jack hung back, his expression suddenly wary. "We're here to help," I called, leaning toward one of the gaps between the boards. "Are you hurt? How did you get down there?" I couldn't see much. The well was dark inside, its depths lost in shadow. The fog seemed to curl around the stone structure, almost as if drawn to it. "I fell," the child's voice said. "I can't climb out. Please help me." Something felt wrong. The well looked really old, moss-covered stones fitted together without mortar, the wood covering it rotted and weathered. It didn't belong on any park map I'd ever studied. "James," Jack's voice was tight with tension. "Step back from there." I glanced at him. "There's a kid down there, Jack." "No," he said firmly. "There isn't." I turned back to the well, confused. The voice was clear as day, echoing slightly against the stone walls. "Please, mister, I'm scared of the dark. Just move the boards and help me out." I reached for the edge of one board, ready to pull it aside. "I know you, James Wilson." The voice changed mid-sentence, dropping several octaves into something that was definitely not a child, something adult and mocking. "I know about the dead deer watching you." My hand froze above the board. "I know you're afraid of the dark because of what happened when you were 9. Cold sweat broke out across my back. The voice continued, lower now, almost intimate. "You were staying at your grandmother's house. The power went out during a storm. You woke up in the pitch black and couldn't find the door. Something was breathing in the corner of the room. Something that whispered your name and told you it had been waiting for you." My chest felt tight. I'd never told anyone about that night. Not my parents, not friends, no one. I'd convinced myself it was just a nightmare, a kid's imagination in the dark. You still check the corners of rooms when you're alone. You still sleep with a light on. I stumbled backward from the well, nearly falling. Jack grabbed my arm and yanked me away. "Run," he said, his face pale. "Now!" We ran, crashed through ferns and bushes, branches whipping our faces. I heard laughter behind us. Deep, satisfied laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We didn't stop until we reached our patrol vehicle, both of us breathing hard, clothes soaked with sweat in the cool morning. Jack leaned against the hood, hands on his knees. "You okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. "That thing," I finally managed. "It knew things about me, things nobody knows." Jack straightened up, his expression grim. "They always do." "They?" I looked at him sharply. "You've heard it before?" He didn't answer right away, just opened the driver's side door. "Get in. We need to talk, but not here." The drive back to the ranger station was tense and quiet. Jack kept looking in the rearview mirror as he gripped the steering wheel. I stared out the window, watching the foggy trees go by, trying to make sense of what happened. That voice knew about my childhood, knew about my deepest fear, knew things I'd buried so deep I barely acknowledged them myself. When we got to the station, Jack didn't go inside. Instead, he parked behind the building in a small lot hidden from the main road. "We shouldn't be seen talking about this," he said, turning off the engine. "About what exactly?" I asked. "What was that thing at the well?" Jack rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking much older than his 42 years. "How long have you been a ranger here, James? 10 years?" He didn't wait for my answer. "I've been here 17. The first 5 years were normal, just dealing with lost hikers, wildlife management, the usual stuff. Then I started noticing things that shouldn't be there. I thought about the mannequins that disappeared from my photos, the staircase leading to nowhere, Sullivan with his white eyes and sharp teeth. Why doesn't anyone talk about it?" I asked. "If these things have been happening for years, why keep it secret?" "Orders from above," Jack said. "Strict policy. We document, we report to senior staff, and we never ever discuss it with the public or even junior rangers." He gave me a tired look. "Though you've seen enough now that I guess you're in the club." "What club?" "The ones who know what's really in these woods." Jack stared out the windshield at the fog-shrouded trees surrounding the station. The stairs, the voices, the dead animals. They're all connected to Sullivan. My mouth went dry. "You know about Sullivan?" Jack's face hardened. "I've seen him, 7 years ago, right before Ranger Collins disappeared." "What happened?" "Collins and I were checking the backcountry campsites near Blue Glacier. We split up to cover more ground. When I reached our meeting point, Sullivan was there instead. Jack's voice had gone flat, emotionless. Same description you gave. Too tall, white eyes, wrong smile. He told me Collins had chosen a different path. Said I would too, someday." "What did he mean?" "I don't know. But Collins was never found. Not a trace." Jack turned to look at me directly. "These things we're seeing, They're not ghosts or monsters in the traditional sense. They're something worse. What then? Tests, Jack said. Games. Sullivan's playing with us, seeing who breaks the rules and who follows them. What rules? Don't touch the stairs. Don't answer voices from places nothing should be. Don't follow lights in the forest at night. Jack ticked them off on his fingers. The senior rangers know them all. They've been passing them down for decades. I thought about the staircase I'd found, how I'd placed my foot on the first step despite every instinct telling me not to. What happens if you break the rules? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. You disappear, Jack said simply. Like Collins, like Miller, like all the others over the years. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. After all these years of secrecy? Because you've already encountered Sullivan directly. You're already part of whatever game he's playing. Jack looked grim. And because that thing in the well knew things about you it shouldn't have known, that means you're being watched, tested. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the morning fog. So what do? We follow the rules, Jack said firmly. We document what we see, we report it through proper channels, and we don't interact with any of it. That's how we stay alive. I thought about Miller's empty hat on the trail, about Samuel Parker's severed arm, about the bloody man whispering about stairs. And what about the people who've already disappeared? Miller? Parker? Do we just leave them? Jack didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was heavy with resignation. There's nothing we can do for them. They're part of Sullivan's game now. I wasn't ready to accept that. There has to be something. Jack suddenly went rigid, his eyes looking at something outside the vehicle. I followed where he was looking and felt terrified. At the edge of the trees behind the station stood a tall, pale person. Even through the fog, I could see those distinctive white eyes staring right at us. Sullivan raised one hand that looked like a wave, his too wide smile visible even from where we were. He's watching us, Jack whispered, his face drained of color. Right now. I reached for the door handle, some irrational part of me wanting to confront Sullivan directly, to demand answers about Miller and Parker. Jack grabbed my arm. Don't. That's exactly what he wants. We sat frozen, watching Sullivan watch us. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked into the trees, his tall figure quickly swallowed by the fog. Jack let out a shaky breath. He's never come this close to the station before, never been this bold. I couldn't take my eyes off the spot where Sullivan had disappeared. What does it mean? It means the game is changing, Jack said quietly, and we're all in danger. Late September brought early darkness to Olympic National Park. The sun now dipped below the mountains by 6, leaving me with hours of patrol and growing shadows. I didn't mind the dark usually. It made the forest quieter, more intimate. But after everything that had happened, each shadow held possibilities I couldn't ignore. That Tuesday evening, I worked the southern boundary, a routine patrol checking for illegal campers or signs of poaching. Nothing special. The beam of my flashlight swept across familiar territory. Fallen logs, thick bushes, the massive trunks of old-growth trees. The forest seemed normal enough, the usual nighttime sounds creating a backdrop of chirps and rustles. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I caught something unusual in my peripheral vision, a shape that didn't match the natural patterns of the forest. I swung my flashlight toward it, illuminating a massive Douglas fir that stood slightly apart from the surrounding trees. The light revealed something so unexpected that I nearly dropped the flashlight. Dozens of human teeth were embedded in the bark, arranged in spiral patterns that climbed from the base toward the upper branches. They shined in the artificial light, incisors, molars, canines, all pushed into the tree as if someone had meticulously inserted each one into the living wood. "What the hell?" I whispered, moving closer. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something hanging from the lower branches. 2 human arms, partially decomposed, were hanging there. The flesh had turned a mottled gray-green, but they were unmistakably human, fingers still intact, a wristwatch still clinging to one bloated wrist. I stepped back, fumbling for my radio while keeping my flashlight pointed at the ugly sight. I needed to document this before calling it in. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and began taking photos and videos, narrating in a low voice what I was seeing. September 21st, approximately 8:15 p.m. Douglas fir near southern boundary, grid reference point 47. Tree appears to have human teeth embedded in the bark in spiral patterns. Two human arms hanging from lower branches. Decomposition suggests they've been here for some time. I circled the tree carefully, documenting every angle. The teeth seemed to follow my movement, shining no matter where I stood. The hanging arms moved slightly in the gentle evening breeze. After gathering enough evidence, I radioed headquarters. "This is Ranger Wilson. I need immediate backup at my location. Possible human remains and evidence of suspicious activity." I gave my coordinates, trying to keep my voice steady. The dispatcher responded quickly. "Copy that, Ranger Wilson. Investigation team is being notified. ETA approximately 40 minutes. Please secure the area and maintain position." I acknowledged and settled in to wait, keeping my flashlight trained on the tree. The longer I looked at it, the more unnatural it seemed. The teeth weren't just placed randomly. They formed patterns, symbols I couldn't recognize, but that seemed deliberate, almost like writing. The wait felt endless. I circled the tree repeatedly, taking more photos, examining the ground for footprints or other evidence. I found nothing, no footprints going to or from the tree, no tools that might have been used to embed the teeth. There was no blood or tissue, which was strange considering the decomposing arms. Finally, I heard voices and saw flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The investigation team had arrived. 4 people, including a forensic specialist I recognized from previous incidents in the park. "Over here," I called, waving my light. The team approached, led by Senior Ranger Martinez. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the tree. "Take a look at this. I've documented everything, but wanted you to see it firsthand." Martinez raised his flashlight, illuminating the massive Douglas fir. His expression remained neutral as he examined it. "What exactly am I looking for, Wilson?" I looked at him, then back at the tree. The teeth were gone. The arms were gone. The bark showed no signs of disturbance. No holes where teeth had been embedded. No marks where branches had been modified to hold human remains. The tree looked completely ordinary. "That's not possible," I said, moving forward. There were teeth, dozens of human teeth pushed into the bark, and arms hanging from these branches right here. I ran my hands over the bark where I'd seen the teeth. The surface was rough but unbroken. I looked up at the branches that had held the decomposing arms. They were bare. "I took photos," I said, pulling out my phone. "Look." I opened my gallery and stopped. Just like with the mannequins, my evidence had vanished. The photos showed an ordinary Douglas fir, no teeth, no arms, nothing unusual at all. Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Ranger Wilson, would you like to sit down for a moment? You seem upset." "I'm not crazy," I said, hearing the edge in my voice. "It was right here. I saw it clearly. I documented everything." Martinez exchanged glances with the others. "James, you've been under a lot of stress lately. With Miller's disappearance and that incident with the deer." "This isn't stress," I insisted. "There were human remains on this tree. Teeth embedded in the bark in spiral patterns. 2 decomposing arms hanging from these branches." Dr. Chen spoke gently. "We should still check the area thoroughly. Sometimes in low light conditions, I know what I saw." They searched anyway, looking around the area for any sign of what I'd described. They found nothing, of course. After 45 minutes, Martinez called off the search. "We'll file a report," he told me, his tone carefully neutral. Maybe get some extra patrols in this sector for the next few days. I knew what they were thinking. I could see it in their careful expressions, the way they avoided direct eye contact. They thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. The drive back to headquarters passed in uncomfortable silence. I stared out the window at the dark forest rushing past, wondering if I could trust my own perceptions anymore. The tree had been so vividly, horribly real. The teeth shining in my flashlight beam, the arms swaying in the breeze. How could something so detailed simply vanish? For the next few days, I kept to myself. Other rangers gave me space, probably warned that I was going through something. I caught fragments of whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. I tried to focus on my work, on the normal, everyday aspects of being a ranger. But the image of that tree stayed with me, as real in my memory as anything I'd ever experienced. 4 nights after the tree incident, I was assigned to patrol the area near Lake Crescent. The night was clear but moonless, making the forest beyond my flashlight beam completely dark. The lake looked black and showed the stars above like a reflection. Around midnight, I noticed something unusual through the trees, blinking lights where no light should be. The nearest campground was miles away, and this section of shoreline was hard to get to, with steep terrain and thick bushes. I turned off my flashlight and moved carefully toward the lights, using the minimal starlight to navigate. Years of experience in these woods had taught me how to move quietly, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. As I got closer, I could make out the source of the light, a dozen or so lanterns arranged in a circle in a small clearing near the lakeshore. Within the circle of light stood 12 people wearing dark clothing, hoods pulled up to hide their faces. I crouched behind a large fallen log about 100 yards away, watching. The group stood completely still, facing inward toward something in the center of their circle. Then, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they began to chant. The language was like nothing I'd ever heard, not Latin or any recognizable modern tongue. The sounds changed between deep throaty noises and high, almost musical tones. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern that made my skin crawl. In the center of their circle stood a small stone structure that looked disturbingly familiar, the same well Jack and I had encountered, where something had spoken to me with knowledge of my deepest fears. The chanting grew louder, more intense. One person broke from the circle and approached the well, carrying something in their hands that I couldn't make out clearly. They placed it on the stone rim, then stepped back into formation. I tried to get a better look, moving my position slightly. My boot scraped against a rock, making a small but distinct sound in the quiet night. The chanting stopped abruptly. One of the people turned, looking directly toward my hiding place. Even from 100 yards away, in near total darkness, I felt them staring at me with impossible precision. The hooded head tilted slightly, as if curious. Then, as one, all 12 people began moving toward me. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, unnaturally smooth. They didn't rush or stumble in the darkness. They just moved forward steadily. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, no longer concerned about making noise. Behind me, I heard the chanting start again, louder now, seeming to come from all directions at once. The forest that I knew so well didn't make sense anymore. Landmarks looked wrong in the darkness. Paths I'd walked 100 times seemed to lead in circles. My flashlight beam bounced around as I ran, making weird shadows everywhere. I ran until my lungs burned, until sweat soaked through my uniform despite the cool night air. Eventually, I stopped, leaning against a tree, trying to catch my breath and get my bearings. The chanting had faded, or I'd outrun it. I checked my GPS, trying to figure out where I was. The screen showed me miles from where I should be, in a section of the park I hadn't been patrolling. That wasn't possible. I couldn't have run that far, not in less than an hour. I switched on my radio. "This is Ranger Wilson. I need..." Static cut through my transmission. Through the white noise, I heard bits of that same chanting, faint but unmistakable. I turned off the radio and kept moving, following my GPS toward the nearest road. The forest felt wrong around me, too quiet in some places, filled with strange sounds in others. Twice I thought I saw people moving alongside my path, just at the edge of my flashlight beam. By the time I reached my vehicle, the eastern sky was starting to lighten. I'd been lost in the woods for hours, wandering in what the GPS track showed as weird, looping patterns that made no sense given the terrain. When I finally returned to headquarters, I was met by my supervisor, Stephen, who took one look at my messy appearance and ushered me into his office. "What happened out there, James?" he asked, closing the door. "Dispatch said you radioed in with an incomplete transmission, then went silent. We were about to send out a search party." I told him everything. The group at the lake, the chanting, the well, my disorientation in the forest. As I spoke, I watched his expression change from concern to something harder to read. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, looking at me. "James, I'm going to be direct with you. I'm concerned about your mental state." "I know what I saw," I said, the same words I'd used about the tree. "You've been through a lot these past few months. Miller's disappearance, that incident with the deer, now these visions." Stephen's voice was carefully neutral. "I think you're experiencing stress-induced paranoia." "It's not paranoia if it's real," I said, hearing how defensive I sounded. "I'm placing you on mandatory leave, effective immediately. 2 weeks, paid. I want you to use this time to rest and speak with a professional." He slid a business card across the desk, a psychologist in Port Angeles who specialized in trauma and stress disorders. I stared at the card but didn't take it. "So that's it? You think I'm losing my mind?" "I think you're a good ranger who's been through some traumatic experiences and needs help processing them." Stephen's tone softened slightly. "Take the time, James. Get some rest. Talk to someone. We'll review your status in 2 weeks. I wanted to argue, to make him understand that what I'd seen was real. But I could tell from his tone that he had made up his mind. This wasn't a suggestion. "Fine," I said, standing up. 2 weeks. As I left his office, everyone stared at me. They'd heard about the tree incident. Now they'd hear about this too. In their eyes, I was the ranger who was losing it, seeing things that weren't there. But I knew what I saw. The tree with its spiral of teeth and hanging arms. The hooded figures chanting around a well that shouldn't exist. These things were real, even if they didn't leave evidence. Even if they disappeared when others showed up. Something was happening in Olympic National Park, something connected to Michael Sullivan, to the stairs, to the disappearances. And now I had 2 weeks away from the park to figure it out. As I drove home that morning, tired and annoyed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was exactly what someone, or something, wanted. My removal from the park felt less like a coincidence and more like the next move in Sullivan's game. The first 3 days of my mandatory leave went by in a blur. I walked around my small cabin on the outskirts of Port Angeles, unable to sleep for more than a couple hours at a time. Stephen had told me to rest, to process what had happened. But I couldn't rest when the images kept running through my mind. The teeth arranged in spiral patterns, the decomposing arms, the hooded figures chanting around that well. I hadn't touched the psychologist's business card. Talking to a mental health professional about what I'd seen would only end with me getting medication I didn't need, or worse, sent to a mental hospital. I wasn't crazy. By the 4th day, I couldn't stand doing nothing anymore. If the senior rangers wouldn't tell me the truth, I needed to find answers somewhere else. I started with the internet, searching for any mentions of Olympic National Park and disappearances. Most results were normal missing persons cases with simple explanations. Hikers not respecting the wilderness, sudden weather changes, or animal attacks. Nothing weird or unexplained. I widened my search to include local legends and folklore. The Olympic Peninsula had been home to several Native American tribes for thousands of years before becoming a national park. If there was something very old in these woods, their oral histories might have clues. The Makah Cultural and Research Center in Nia Bay was my first stop. I introduced myself as a park ranger researching local folklore for educational programs, not entirely a lie. The center's archivist, a woman named Diane, seemed happy about my interest. "Most of the tourists just want to see the whaling exhibits," she said, leading me to a small research room. "The deeper cultural aspects get overlooked." I spent hours going through their collection of recorded oral histories and transcribed interviews with tribal elders. Most stories centered around traditional Makah practices, their relationship with the ocean, and spirit beings associated with natural elements. Nothing about stairs in the forest or pale men with white eyes. As I was preparing to leave, Diane asked about my specific research interests. "I'm looking for stories about entities or beings in the forest," I said carefully, "particularly anything about figures who test or challenge humans." Something in her expression changed. "You might want to speak with the elders directly," she said after a pause. "Some stories aren't written down. Try the Quileute Reservation in La Push. Ask for Clara Lewis. She knows the old ways better than most." The next day, I drove to La Push. It was a small coastal reservation where the Quileute River meets the Pacific. Gray clouds hung low, and I could smell salt and seaweed in the air. After asking around at the tribal center, someone pointed me to a small blue house near the beach. Clara Lewis was at least 80 years old. Her small living room had baskets, wooden figures, and dream catchers everywhere. She listened patiently as I explained my interest in local legends. "The old stories," she said, nodding slowly. "Why do you really want to know about them, Ranger?" Something in her tone told me she wouldn't accept my educational program excuse. "I've seen things in the park," I admitted. "Things I can't explain. I think they might be connected to something ancient." She studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp with an intelligence that belied her age. "What kinds of things?" I told her everything. The bloodied man with the severed arm, the unnaturally arranged deer, Miller's disappearance, the stairs leading nowhere, and Sullivan with his white eyes and too many teeth. As I spoke, her face stayed neutral, but I noticed her fingers tightening around her tea mug. When I finished, she put down her mug and reached for a small wooden box on a nearby shelf. From it, she took out a bundle of dried herbs tied with red string. "Burn this in your home tonight," she said, placing it in my hand. "It will offer some protection." "Protection from what?" I asked. "From the Watchers." She looked toward her window, though the curtains were drawn. "The testing ones." My pulse quickened. "You know about them?" "Our people have lived in these lands for thousands of years," she said. "We have always known about the ones who watch from the spaces between, the beings who test the strength of a person's spirit." "Testing how?" "Through fear," she said simply. "They create scenarios that trigger your deepest fears. Those who resist are respected. Those who succumb..." She trailed off, looking into her tea. "What happens to them?" "They are taken, collected. The severed arm, the disappearances. Miller. Is there a way to stop them? To get back the people they've taken?" Clara was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. "The pale trickster is the most dangerous. He collects souls through his stairways between worlds. He has been here since before our ancestors arrived. We call him Ka'atl in our language, the one who changes faces." "Michael Sullivan," I said. "That's what he calls himself now." She nodded. "He goes by different names throughout history. He looks different too. But you can always tell by his eyes what he really is. They're cold and empty, with this very old hunger in them." "The white eyes," I murmured. "Yes, When you see those eyes, you must look away. To hold his gaze is to invite him into your mind. I thought of how Sullivan had looked directly at me in the forest, how his gaze had seemed to pierce through my defenses. "What does he want?" I asked. "Entertainment," she said. "The testing ones feed on fear and confusion. They play games with humans because our emotions sustain them." She leaned forward. "But most dangerous is their ability to make you question your own mind. That is how they truly win, when you no longer trust what you see and feel. Just like what was happening to me, the evidence that disappeared, the other rangers thinking I was losing my mind. How do I fight them?" Clara's face relaxed a bit. "You cannot fight them directly. They are not physical beings as we understand them. They exist partially in our world, and partially in others." "The stairs," I said. "They lead to these other worlds?" "The stairs are doorways," she confirmed, "but they are one-way passages for most who enter. Few return unchanged." I spent nearly 3 hours with Clara, learning everything she knew about the testing ones and their games. She told me stories passed down through generations of tribal members who disappeared after reporting strange structures in the forest, of hunters who encountered beings that knew their deepest thoughts, of the rare few who resisted the tests and were left with gifts of secret knowledge. Before I left, she gave me a small carved figure, a stylized wolf with its head thrown back in a silent howl. "Keep this with you," she said. "It will not stop them, but it may help you remember yourself when the moment comes." "What moment?" "When you must choose your path." Her eyes held mine. "Because you will face that choice, Ranger Wilson. I can see it in you. You are already caught in the trickster's game." The rest of my leave went by in a blur of research. I talked to other tribal elders, but none were as open as Clara. I read old books about native beliefs in strange spaces and trickster spirits. I wrote down everything I learned in a journal, trying to find patterns and ways to fight back. I barely slept anymore. When I did manage to fall asleep, I dreamed about stairs going down into darkness and Sullivan with his white eyes. I got up each morning feeling worse than when I went to bed. By the time my 2 weeks ended, I was running on coffee and determination. I'd gotten skinnier, and I looked terrible in the mirror. My face was thin with dark circles under my red eyes. But I was more sure than ever about what I was dealing with. This wasn't just in my head or because of trauma. This was something very old and hungry that had been hunting in these woods for hundreds of years. My first day back at work was a Tuesday. The headquarters seemed weird somehow, like everything was just a little bit off. My co-workers were nice but kept their distance. People stopped talking when I walked into rooms. I noticed Steve watching me with worry on his face. "Good to have you back, James," he said during our brief meeting that morning. "How are you feeling?" "Rested," I lied. "Clear-headed." He nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "I'm putting you on the western trails today. Nothing too strenuous for your first day back." "I can handle my regular routes," I objected. "Western trails," he repeated firmly. "Let's ease you back in." The western trails were the most heavily trafficked in the park. Wide, well-maintained paths, popular with tourists and day hikers. Nothing strange or unexplainable ever happened there. Steve was keeping me away from the remote areas where I'd had my encounters. I didn't argue further. Better to let him think I was cooperating. As I walked the western trails that day, checking camping permits and answering tourists' questions about wildlife, I felt eyes on me constantly. Whenever I turned to look, there was nothing unusual, just hikers enjoying the forest, birds moving between branches, the occasional squirrel or chipmunk. Yet the feeling stuck with me. Something was watching me, or someone. The feeling continued for the next 3 days. I was assigned only to the busiest, most public areas of the park. At night, I went home to my cabin and burned Clara's herbs. The smoke smelled bad, but I wasn't sure if it actually helped or just made me feel better. On Friday, I made my decision. I couldn't wait any longer for answers. I needed to find a staircase again. Not to report it, not to document it, but to understand it. To test Clara's stories about doorways between worlds. My shift ended at 4 that afternoon. Instead of heading home, I drove to a remote trailhead near the Elwha River, an area where I'd previously found weird stuff. I parked my personal vehicle rather than my ranger truck, changed into hiking clothes, and headed into the forest as daylight began to fade. This was against every protocol, every rule of safety I'd learned in my decade as a ranger. You don't go into remote wilderness alone at dusk. You don't deliberately seek out things that have been connected to disappearances. You don't climb stairs that shouldn't exist. But I needed answers more than I needed safety. I hiked for nearly 2 hours, moving away from established trails into the truly wild sections of the park. The forest grew darker around me, but I kept my flashlight off as long as possible, navigating by the fading natural light. I wanted to be difficult to track. As full darkness settled, I felt a change in the air. The normal forest sounds stopped until I walked in complete quiet. The temperature dropped. I switched on my flashlight, looking across the surrounding trees. Nothing looked unusual at first. Then, as I completed a full circle, the light caught something that hadn't been there when I started turning. A staircase. Unlike the fancy Victorian stairs I'd seen before, these were simpler. Wooden steps rising about 15 feet before ending in empty air. They looked weathered, as if they'd stood in this spot for decades, yet I knew they hadn't been there moments before. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam fixed on the structure. Nothing about them looked threatening. I forced myself to continue until I stood at the base of the stairs. This was it. The doorway Clara had described. The passage between worlds that Sullivan used to take his victims. I took a deep breath and placed my foot on the first step. My vision got blurry, but I forced myself to take another step up. The second step made me feel so sick I almost bent over. The forest around me looked weird. I grabbed the wooden railing to steady myself. One more step. I needed to see what happened after 3 steps. I lifted my foot, fighting against what felt like invisible weights on my ankles. With huge effort, I placed it on the 3rd step. The world changed. The forest vanished. The stairs remained beneath my feet, but now they went down into darkness rather than up into empty air. I stood at the entrance to a tunnel that stretched far beyond what my flashlight could show. The air felt thick, making each breath hard work. I tried to turn back, to look behind me, but there was no forest there anymore. Just more tunnel stretching in the opposite direction. The stairs had become a landing in an endless underground passage. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding muffled in the thick air. No response came, but the walls moved slightly when I spoke, like they were flinching. I took a small step forward, deeper into the tunnel. My flashlight only lit up a few feet ahead before darkness took over. I kept moving, step by step, carefully checking the floor with my light. After walking for what felt like minutes but could have been longer, my watch had stopped when I stepped onto the 3rd stair. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. As my light moved across the space, I stopped moving. I was looking at my grandma's house. Not the whole house, but a perfect copy of the bedroom where I'd stayed as a kid. The twin bed with its blue and white checkered quilt. The small wooden dresser with the missing bottom knob. The window that never fully closed, always letting in a draft. This was the room where, when I was 9, I'd experienced the fear that still showed up in my nightmares. The power outage during the storm. The complete darkness. The thing breathing in the corner. The chamber got darker even with my flashlight on. The light reached less and less until it only showed a few inches in front of me. I heard a sound from the corner of the room. A slow, careful inhale followed by a rough exhale. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The breathing continued, growing slightly louder. I smelled something musty and damp, like old books left in a flooded basement. "I know this isn't real," I said, gripping the wolf carving tightly. "This is a test, a manifestation of fear." A low chuckle replaced the breathing. "Is that what the old woman told you?" I swung my flashlight toward the voice, but the beam revealed nothing but empty space. "These are just memories," I insisted. "You're pulling them from my mind to scare me." "Our memory's not real, James Wilson." The voice seemed to come from everywhere now. "Are your fears not real simply because they live in your head?" The room started to change again. The bedroom I knew disappeared. Instead, a forest clearing showed up. At the center lay the bloodied man we'd found months ago, still holding the severed arm to his chest. But this time, he was looking directly at me, his eyes clear and focused. "He took the boy to the stairs," the man said, his voice stronger than I remembered. "And now he's taking you." The man's body started to change, his bones making cracking sounds as his arms and legs got longer. His skin got thinner and whiter until you could almost see through it. His eyes got bigger, losing all their color until they were just white. Michael Sullivan stood up where the bloody man had been before. His smile was way too big, showing his super sharp teeth. "You're progressing through the game quite well, James," he said. His voice had changed too, deeper, with that unplaceable accent I remembered from our encounter in the forest. But his eyes were different now, glowing with an internal light, like captured moonbeams. "Few make it this far." "This isn't a game," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "People have disappeared. You've taken them." "Taken?" Sullivan looked amused. "Is that what you think?" He moved closer, his movements too fluid to be human. "I offer paths, choices. Some accept, some refuse." "Where are they? Miller and Samuel Parker?" "They chose different paths in the game," Sullivan said, tilting his head at an impossible angle. "As will you." "I want answers," I demanded. "What are you? What is this place?" Sullivan's smile widened further than any human mouth should be able to stretch. "Questions are part of the game, James. But not all questions have answers you can understand with your limited perception." The tunnel began to change around us, the walls contracting inward. Dirt and small stones rained down from above. "What's happening?" I asked, looking up as larger chunks of earth broke free from the ceiling. "Time for you to make a choice," Sullivan said, seemingly unbothered by the collapsing tunnel. "Continue forward or turn back, but know that each path has consequences." "I'm not playing your game," I insisted. "You've been playing since you found Samuel's arm," Sullivan said. "Since you first felt watched in the forest. Since you first questioned what was real." The tunnel walls closed in faster now, the space between Sullivan and me growing smaller. I could smell his breath, like frozen metal and something sweet that had long since rotted. "There is so much more to see, James," Sullivan whispered as he began to fade before my eyes. "So many more tests to pass." The tunnel collapsed entirely. Crushing weight pressed against me from all sides as earth filled my nostrils, my mouth, my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Total darkness surrounded me as the pressure got too much. I was dying, buried alive in a tunnel that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. My chest burned from lack of oxygen. I started to black out. The last thing I heard was Sullivan's voice, somehow clear, even with earth filling my ears. "See you on the other side, player." Then darkness took me completely. I came back to consciousness with dirt in my mouth. My eyes opened to a gray morning sky visible through the tall Douglas firs. I stayed completely still. The forest, the staircase, Sullivan. I sat up quickly. I was on the forest floor, lying on wet pine needles and leaves. My flashlight lay beside me, switched off but undamaged. The staircase was gone. Nothing remained to suggest it had ever been there. No dent in the ground, no scattered wooden pieces, nothing but normal forest. I searched my pockets, finding my keys, wallet, and the small carved wolf Clara had given me. As I pulled it out, I noticed a small wooden object next to where my head had been. I picked it up. It was a perfectly carved miniature staircase. I put both carvings into my pocket and checked my phone. The screen lit up, showing no service, not unusual this deep in the park. But the date made me feel sick. Friday, October 14th. I had entered the forest on Tuesday, October 11th. 3 days had passed, 3 days lost, yet my memories only accounted for what felt like minutes in that tunnel. My clothes were clean. My body showed no signs of having spent 3 days in the wilderness. No hunger, no thirst, no sunburn. I needed to get back to headquarters. They would be looking for me by now. The hike back took longer than I expected. I got turned around a lot, and places I knew well seemed somehow strange. Twice I had to check my GPS to fix my course. By the time I reached the main trail, it was already afternoon. At the trailhead, I found 3 parked vehicles and a county sheriff's SUV. As I got closer, several people turned toward me, rangers I knew and 2 deputies. Their faces changed from surprise to relief to something else I couldn't really read. Mark Reeves, one of the senior rangers, saw me first. "Wilson, we found him," he called out, jogging toward me. "Jesus, man, where have you been?" Before I could answer, I was surrounded by the search team. Questions came from all directions. Was I hurt? What happened? Why hadn't I responded to radio calls? Where had I been sleeping? "I'm fine," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "I just need to get back to headquarters." In the ranger station, Steve was waiting, his face tight with concern and barely controlled anger. He ushered me into his office, closing the door firmly behind us. 3 days, James, he said, his voice low. 3 days with no contact, no trace. Your car at a remote trailhead, no camping gear, no extra supplies. He leaned against his desk. "Do you have any idea what we've been thinking? What resources we've dedicated to finding you?" I looked down at my hands. They were clean. Too clean for someone who had spent 3 days in the backcountry. "I'm sorry," I said. "I can't explain it." "Try," Steve said flatly. I considered telling him everything, the staircase, the tunnel, Sullivan. But Clara's warning stuck in my mind. The senior staff knew about Sullivan. They had protocols, and they'd already shown they wouldn't share what they knew with me. "I went hiking after my shift on Tuesday," I began. I wanted to clear my head. I must have gotten lost. The lie felt hollow, but it was better than the truth he wouldn't believe. My memory's fuzzy. I remember walking, and then waking up this morning. Steve studied my face. "You're saying you have no memory of the past 3 days? At all?" "That's right. And you show no signs of exposure, dehydration, or hunger after 3 days supposedly lost in the wilderness." His skepticism was evident. I had no answer for that. Steve sighed heavily. "I want you to go to the hospital, get checked out. Full workup, physical, neurological, toxicology. Something happened out there and I need to know you're fit for duty." "I feel fine," I protested. "That's not good enough. Not after 2 incidents in less than a month." His tone softened slightly. "James, I'm concerned about you. Not just as your supervisor, but as someone who's worked with you for years. This isn't like you." I nodded, knowing argument was pointless. The hospital found nothing wrong with me. No injuries, no signs of dehydration, no unusual substances in my bloodstream. The neurologist noted mild confusion consistent with a dissociative episode, but could offer no medical explanation for my missing time. Steve put me on restricted duty, office work only, no solo patrols, mandatory counseling sessions twice weekly. I accepted these conditions without protest. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand what Sullivan had meant by "see you on the other side." The wooden staircase carving sat on my bedside table at night. Sometimes I thought I heard it creaking, as if something tiny were climbing the miniature steps. The changes began gradually. First, it was the way other rangers looked at me. Quick glances when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. Even rangers who had been friendly for years kept their distance, finding reasons to be elsewhere when I was around. Then came the animals. During my first patrol back on limited duty, paired with Senior Ranger Martinez, I noticed how wildlife reacted to my presence. Birds stopped singing when I walked beneath their trees. Squirrels froze on branches, watching me with unblinking eyes until I passed. A young deer we spotted on the trail looked directly at me before bolting away, ignoring Martinez completely. "Never seen them react like that," Martinez commented. "Usually they watch both of us or neither." I said nothing. I knew why the animals ran away from me. They sensed something different, something wrong. The first object appeared 2 weeks after my return. I finished a morning patrol and found a small package wrapped in brown paper on the hood of my truck. No note, no explanation. Inside was an old brass compass with a yellowed face and worn-down brass casing. I checked if it worked against my modern compass. The needle pointed north like it should. But as I walked around my truck, holding both compasses, I noticed something weird. While my regular compass kept pointing to magnetic north, the old one's needle turned slowly, always pointing at me no matter where I moved. I put it on the ground and backed away 10 feet. The needle turned until it pointed right at me. 20 feet. Same thing. I walked in a circle around it, and the needle followed me perfectly, like I had become magnetic north. I took the compass home that night and set it on my kitchen counter. From everywhere in my small cabin, I could tell it was pointing toward me, like someone was watching me. The kid's drawing showed up a week later, stuck under my windshield wiper after I'd spent the morning checking trail damage with another ranger. It was on regular white school paper. Drawn in crayon was a staircase, simple but clear, leading up to what looked like a moon with a big smile. At the bottom of the stairs was a stick figure wearing what looked like a ranger hat. At the top, waiting, was a much taller figure with long arms reaching down toward the ranger. My partner that day hadn't seen who left it. Probably some kid saying thanks for the Junior Ranger program, he said, though he looked like he didn't believe that any more than I did. The photo was the worst. I found it inside my locked cabin, on the kitchen table when I got home from work. A Polaroid showing me asleep in my own bed, taken from my bedroom doorway. The timestamp in the corner showed 3:17 a.m. the night before. I'd been alone. My doors had been locked. The windows were still locked from the inside. Something, had been in my home while I slept, standing in my bedroom doorway, watching me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I sat in my living room with every light on, a kitchen knife beside me, watching the brass compass needle on the coffee table pointing straight at my chest. By the end of the month, I was a mess. Not sleeping had given me dark circles under my eyes. I'd lost more weight. In my required counseling sessions, I just dodged the truth and said what the counselor wanted to hear: stress, anxiety, trauma from Miller's disappearance. Steve called me into his office on a Wednesday morning. He didn't waste time with small talk. "This isn't working, James," he said. "You're not getting better. If anything, you're worse than when you started restricted duty." I didn't disagree. "I'm concerned about your mental health and your ability to perform your duties safely." He pushed a piece of paper across the desk. "I'm recommending extended medical leave. Minimum 6 months, with reevaluation before you return to any duties. 6 months away from the park, 6 months away from answers, from Sullivan, from any chance of finding Miller." "When?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "End of the week. Friday will be your last day until spring at the earliest." He watched me carefully. "I can have someone clean out your locker if you prefer not to." "I'll do it," I cut in. "I'd like to finish out the week. One last patrol." Steve paused, then nodded. Eastern Ridge only, with Martinez. No deviations. I agreed, though I already knew I would break that promise. Friday dawned clear and cold. My breath clouded in front of me as I loaded my gear into the patrol truck. Martinez was running late. A family emergency, dispatch informed me. They were finding a replacement, but in the meantime I could begin checking the eastern trailheads. I headed for the most remote section, the area closest to where I'd found the staircase a month earlier. The forest felt strange that morning. No birds called. No insects buzzed. Just the sound of my boots on the packed earth and my own breathing. In a small clearing about 2 miles from the trailhead, I found the footprints. Adult prints, deep and clear in a patch of mud, accompanied by smaller prints. A child's. They moved in a straight line across the clearing, disappearing into the trees on the far side. I knew I should wait for Martinez. I knew I should radio in my location and the discovery. I knew I should follow protocol. Instead, I followed the footprints. They led through a dense section of forest I'd patrolled dozens of times before, yet somehow looked unfamiliar now. The trees seemed taller, older, their branches making patterns overhead that I'd never noticed. The temperature dropped with each step I took until I could see my breath hanging in the air before me. The footprints ended at the edge of another clearing, one that shouldn't have existed on any park map. In its center stood a staircase unlike any I'd seen before. Where the others had been simple wooden structures, this one was impressive. Carved marble steps curving gently upward, fancy railings that looked like gold rising at least 30 feet before ending in empty air. At the top step stood Michael Sullivan. His white eyes seemed to shine in the dim forest light. Beside him stood a thinner figure. I felt sick when I recognized James Miller. His skin was now as pale as Sullivan's, and his eyes were completely white. Sullivan raised a hand. His smile was too wide, showing those needle-sharp teeth. "Welcome to the final stage, James Wilson," he called down, his voice carrying perfectly despite the distance. "You've played admirably." Miller said nothing, but his blank white eyes followed me as I stepped into the clearing. I knew what I should do. Radio for backup. Document the scene. Retreat to a safe distance. Wait for help. All the protocols I'd followed for a decade as a ranger. Instead, I walked toward the staircase, pulled by something I couldn't explain. I needed answers more than I felt scared. I needed to understand what had happened to Miller, to Parker, to all the others who had disappeared over the decades. As I reached the first step, I stopped and looked up at Sullivan and Miller. I thought of Clara's warnings about one-way passages. I thought of the rangers who refused to speak about Sullivan. I thought of the bloodied man holding a child's severed arm, whispering about stairs. I placed my foot on the first marble step. Unlike before, no pressure built in my head. No nausea swept through me. Nothing tried to force me back. This time, the stairs welcomed me. I began to climb, each step bringing me closer to Sullivan and Miller, closer to answers I'd looked for months. The forest around me seemed to fade slightly, becoming less real with each step I took. By the 5th step, the sounds of the forest had disappeared completely. By the 10th, the air had changed, thicker, heavier, with a smell I couldn't identify. Sullivan watched me with that terrible smile, Miller still beside him. As I got to the top, I realized what was different about this staircase, why it felt easier to climb. This time I was invited. I reached the step just below where they stood. Sullivan held out his hand, his long, pale fingers reaching toward me. "Are you ready to understand, James Wilson?" he asked. "Are you ready to see what exists beyond the limits of your world?" I looked back down at the forest below, now seeming distant and unreal. I thought of my cabin, of headquarters, of all the normal human connections I was about to leave behind. Then I looked at Miller's transformed face, at those white eyes that had once been so full of life and enthusiasm. I took Sullivan's hand and stepped onto the final stair.